No matter who comes out as Pope after this conclave, which is set to begin tomorrow, ends, the war for the faith in the heart of the church is only going to intensify. But that's not something that should bring you worry or anxiety. In my opinion, it's something that should excite you, and I'm going to explain why. At this point, there's some pretty interesting things going on. It seems that the plan of Pope Francis is objectively now something that has been rejected in the public square, not just by traditionalists, but by conservatives and sort of mainline Catholics in general. In fact, Archbishop Cordellion from San Francisco, he wrote an article for First Things, which I recommend everybody goes and checks out. He's been posting snippets of it on Twitter. And the funny thing is that the things that he's saying are things that a few years ago would have put you in the camp of the Taylor Marshalls and the Michael Matts as some sort of rad trad. I'm just going to read you something here from Cordellion to show what I'm saying. He said, the critical point that concretized the sense of rupture in the liturgical tradition was the historically unprecedented decision to convene a committee of scholars to dramatically rewrite the liturgy and impose it on the entire Catholic world in a top-down fashion. He says, again, I'm old enough to remember when that happened and to remember the resistance of more well-seasoned Catholics in the pews. But Catholics were more obedient to their pastors in those days, and they accepted changes they didn't like, ones that seemed even to contradict what they had been taught about the Catholic faith for their whole lives. Now, as someone who's read a lot of traditional Catholic literature, if somebody presented me with that quote and said, this is from Michael Davies, old war dog in tradition, may God rest his soul, one of the great heroes we've had in the sort of Catholic counter-revolution. If somebody had told me that it was from someone like Dietrich von Hildebrand, or Michael Matt, or Christopher Ferrara, or any of these big names that have been around in tradition for a long time, these well-known authors, the late John Venari, for example. If anyone said, hey, look at this quote from so-and-so, I'd say, oh, yeah, that sounds exactly like something a trad would write. But this is from the Bishop of San Francisco. Granted, Archbishop Cordellion has been extremely amenable to the traditional Latin Mass, but it's one thing to be someone who tolerates and even supports people's right to have what is meaningful to them, which even a modernist can do. It's another thing for a man like him to come out and say, the point of rupture was when they remade the liturgy in a radical fashion. And Catholics were obedient to this, but it was contrary to the faith. Again, this is something you would be called a schismatic or a rad trad for saying just 5 years ago, and now we have a very conservative yet mainline Catholic bishop of the Catholic Church saying these things, and I applaud him for it, and I support him wholeheartedly in his statements. And this is why I'm convinced that there is a war that is going to be intensifying, whoever the next pope is. And as I said just before the introduction, I don't think that's a bad thing. And here's why. The book of Job tells us that life on earth is warfare. The life of the Christian is warfare. It's war against temptation. It's war against the flesh. It's war against the devil. It's war against concupiscence. It's war against all the things that war against us to try to drag us to hell. And our daily grind is that of pursuing unto sanctification. And in fact, those who achieve the greatest heights of sanctification will attest just how hard the battle and the war really is. Our Lord Jesus Christ did not come as a pacifist. Of course, we don't needlessly start wars and so forth, but our religion is a religion of holy violence, violence against sin, and violence against the enemies of God. I think for a long time Catholics have been pacified with all the whims of the culture, just like everybody else. And for the last 50, 60 years or so, it's been largely the traditionalists, so to speak, who have had that very militant mindset, in the sense of not resting on their laurels and understanding that they're not really welcome anywhere, and they've got to forge on and keep their head down and just keep trudging forward because the path is going to have many obstacles. Whereas many Catholics sort of have done their best to kind of just go with the flow, but that all kind of changed, didn't it, with Pope Francis? And that story's been told 100 different ways. I won't tell it all here, but it was a time of great confusion. So now it's not just traditionalists, it's Catholics with any supernatural faith really at all, who are hoping, finally, that there will be a pope that will come who will not be a progressive, who will not be a liberal. And I find this fascinating. Just maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, if you had have asked the average, conservative mainline Catholic whether they thought it would be a good thing if the next pope was supportive of the traditional Latin Mass, they probably would have thought, well, what's the big deal? But now it seems like everybody knows that it's a big deal. And this goes to the heart of the battle that we're in. The war for the traditional Latin Mass, or the war for the traditional liturgical tradition of the Church, is not just about the aesthetics. It's about how we see ourselves as Catholics. I think Michael Matt has been bang on, for example, with calling his conference the Catholic Identity Conference, because inherent in that Catholic identity is this understanding that you actually love your ancestors and you identify with them and you love your patrimony and your ancestors, and you're not ashamed to share that with them. One of the most maddening things about this modern or postmodern age is that we're kind of at war with history. All the history has to be rewritten in order for it to be woke and so on and so forth. I've seen this in spades here in Canada with the story of the residential schools and the mass graves that never actually existed and so on and so forth. And I'm sure in your country, wherever you're listening to this, you've seen aspects of this. The Irish have gone through it about their Catholic history with the myth about the Magdalene laundry and so forth. And, Catholics in California especially have had to deal with the malicious, calumnious, just slander about St. Junipero Serra and other such things. We all have to deal with this in some way. History has been rewritten by the Marxists and so forth to try to make the Catholic Church look like it was this organization that was against the flourishing of human beings. And only when it got out of the way could human beings finally realize their full potential. And this is the furthest thing from the truth. It has been the worst thing that the hierarchs and the Church in an institutional sense have ever done in history. The worst thing that's ever happened has been this rewriting of history on behalf of the actual prelates of the Church. The worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the Church, as far as our Catholic identity is concerned, has been the rewriting of our Catholic patrimony, which is embodied by the fact that the liturgy itself was completely dismantled and recreated out of whole cloth. And the reason is because when they did that, it wasn't just them changing some sort of liturgical rubric. It wasn't just a reform of a missal. What it was a tearing up of patrimony. It was a tearing up of history. It was a tearing up of eternity's place in the temporal world, embodied by the guarded liturgical tradition prayed by Catholics for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. By ripping up that missal and by giving us a new one, what they did is they ripped up Catholicism as it had always been understood and said, here's a new religion for you. That's what happened. It's a very mysterious thing. How can this be so? How can the indefectible Catholic Church, the Bride of Christ, do something so horrendous against the faithful? I don't have an answer for that, and this has been something people have debated back and forth for the last 50 or 60 years, the extent of papal infallibility, whatever. I'm not here to talk about that, but I just know that it happened. And I know that the sense of that has become so palpable that Catholics, like Archbishop Cordellion, not even just traditionalists, understand that what's at stake with this next pope, it's not just about restoring the permission to say the Mass, it's about restoring permission to be Catholic. And that's the thing that we need to war about. And that should give us excitement. We all, as I said, have to go to war in some way in life. Wouldn't it be great if we could fight for a good cause? One of the reasons why we love war movies and stuff and films or books and so forth is because, we love to read about characters or see characters on film go to battle for what they love. I just read The Hobbit with my oldest children, and we're watching some of the movie and whatever. And There's just something natural. You go, wow, I get to go on an adventure and I might die the whole time, but in the end, I get to win and beat the dragon. I mean, this is what dreams are made of. This moment coming in the church is extraordinary, because if a liberal pope walks out, then we say, we know where the battlegrounds, the battle lines are drawn, and we're not alone anymore as traditionalists. We don't just have to worry about, crazy rad trad people on the internet or some bishops that people don't want to talk about. It's not just them who we know have our back, but we have mainline prelates in the church who are saying, those traditionalists are probably onto something. And I want to just talk to my traditionalist friends here for a second. You have to squash that understandable propensity to want to sort of be pessimistic and say, well, these men aren't really traditionalists. Of course, who cares? Who cares? How can all of the people that you love and all the prelates of the church and the faithful, how can they embrace tradition if not by degree, if not incrementally? Unless you happen to be raised in a family that attended the SSPX or an Ecclesia Dei community or something like that, starting in 1988, unless you were raised like that, all of us found tradition in some way, and it was by incremental degrees. So to see the prelates of the church, the mainstream ones and so forth, publishing things in widely read by millions of readers, things like First Things magazine, talking about a rupture in Catholic tradition and liturgy, the way that traditionalists only would have been speaking about it 5 to 10 years ago. This is an amazing thing to see. It doesn't mean the crisis in the church is over, but it means that you, as a traditionalist, are winning. All your prayers, all your sacrifices, all your tears, all the calumny you've had to go through, I can tell you my fair share. I'm sure you've been through yours. Everyone calling you a schismatic and all these things because you're just trying to keep the Catholic faith. But all of those things have been said about you, and guess what? It's not for nothing. Because when you suffer for the Catholic faith, when you suffer for the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, those prayers are not wasted. Now, I'm going to continue just in a second here, but speaking of Catholic tradition, I do want to tell you about something that I'm doing this September. So one way of understanding our Catholic history is to visit the Holy Land, and a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage opportunity awaits you. And I am going to the Holy Land with the traditional Catholic priests run by Catholic Heritage Tours, and we're going to be touring the greatest locations in the Holy Land: Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and so forth, the Sea of Galilee, you name it. If Christ and Our Lady walked there with the apostles, then we're going to do our best to go there, and we'll have Mass at the holy sites and visit them and pray at them and have Mass every day, and it's going to be absolutely amazing. It's a very jam-packed trip. It's one of those trips where you need to be in decent shape. It's not like running a marathon or something, but to put it in perspective, the last trip that we did last year to Italy, which was very busy, it was listed as a moderate as far as moderate trip as far as the scale of difficulty for pilgrimage is concerned. And we did about 15,000 to 18,000 steps a day, walked about 7-8 miles. This one is listed as active, so more than that. So you can expect walking about 8, 9, 10 miles a day, lots of time on your feet. So you don't have to be a triathlete, but it's something where if you have a very sedentary lifestyle, or if you're elderly, you'd want to spend the next few months at least going for 3 or 4 kind of decent walks a week to get used to it and make sure you have some good shoes. So just keep that in mind. And but if you want to go, check the link in the description. I'd love to have you with me, and we can go to the Holy Land, get that crusading spirit, and share that time together. You can go to kennedyhall.ca/holy-land for more information, or just click the link underneath. So what if a liberal pope walks out? Well, we just talked about that, but what if a very sort of conservative or right-leaning pope walks out? What if a Cardinal Mueller walks out? What if a Cardinal Sarah walks out? What if Cardinal Pizzaballa, who seems to have a lot of promise, walks out? What if a man walks out on the loggia and we have no idea what he's about? He's just someone who doesn't have much of a profile, and we have no idea. And then within 5, 6, 7 months, we start seeing, wow, he's restored, Summorum Pontificum or whatever, or he's making more overtures toward the SSPX and wants them to be regularized, but not requiring any compromise and this and that, and things look pretty good. I mean, what if things like that start happening? They very well could. Well, then the war is going to intensify in a different way, because if a liberal pope walks out, then it's the same war, but now our team is bigger, and that's exciting. If it's a very right-wing leaning pope, a very conservative traditional leaning pope, and things are much more amenable for traditionalists and Latin Mass can flourish again and so forth, then it's a different war. Because now you have to understand the retaliatory forces against that will be extremely strong. It's like when a very right-wing politician wins in an election, it's great, but then you know that all the forces of hell are going to be as unscrupulous as possible because, Marxists have no morals. And it will be a very tumultuous affair to make sure that you can maintain that power and influence. The same sort of thing will happen in the church, for sure. But either way, the fight is going to intensify in some way, and that should give us motivation and hope. The last thing that Catholics need to do is to look at this as if this is like the death nail or the last hope, etc., because it's not. The church is not going to end tomorrow, or I guess, the day the Pope's elected. Even if he's a terrible Pope, it's still not going to end. And if he's a very good Pope and turns out to do lots of good things, the battle for the soul of the faith, the soul of the church, will continue until the second coming of Christ in some fashion. And the entire time you will be called to be a part of that. I, for one, am extremely excited about the prospect of a new papacy, given everything that's transpired. As I said, just to sort of summarize, if it's a liberal Pope, I'm excited about the challenge and having so many more strong voices who are saying the same things traditionalists have been saying for half a century. If it's a very conservative, right-leaning Pope, or one who turns out to be so, who is very conciliatory towards traditionalists and so forth, then I'm excited for that fight, because the enemy will be the liberals still, but at least from a different vantage point, and will have a strength behind us. Either way, it's going to be something extraordinary to behold. I think, it's been so hard for the last, while to evangelize as a traditional Catholic, because, I was joking with Jesse Romero. I was on his show the other day, and he was saying, it's hard because you want to explain the faith to your friends and stuff to have them convert, or they're Protestants or whatever. And then when they get to the church, it's like, by the way, there's a crisis going on, and it's really hard to evangelize in that milieu because you're not really sure what to do. I think this gives us a lot of motivation for how to explain the faith and how to spread the faith, because now we're entering into a new chapter. And now, as I said, it's not just you and your crazy, radtradblogspot.com/schism, that you have to go to in order to find the truth about the Second Vatican Council and the traditional Mass and so forth. That stuff has gone mainstream. And I think that's an amazing thing. So I'll end there. I don't have much else to say. But if you do want to find out why on earth we got to the point that we're at right now in this moment, how could things get to the point where we're talking about a war for the traditional liturgy in the church, which has been around forever, and we've got this, conclave that's captured the world's attention about, is the church going to go with Francis, or is the church going to, go back to the old ways and so forth, and why is this even something that makes the news? Well, it's because of the fact that modernism has infiltrated every corner of the hierarchy and the prelatures of the church. And that's something that we have to reconcile with. And I just wrote a book on this called What Happened to Catholicism. And you can find that book linked underneath. There is a link there for all my links. And if you open that up, you can find my books, The Pilgrimage, and so forth. And it's published by Sophia Press. So check out What Happened to Catholicism. It talks about the spread of modernism through the lens of Pope Pius X's encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis, where he identified and defined the heresy itself. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you today. Courage, and may God bless you all, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.